are there. Last night, Centre Alliance Senator Rex Patrick moved a motion to establish a Senate committee inquiry into Australia's relations with China. And one Liberal senator crossed the floor in support of the motion, which ultimately didn't succeed. That was Liberal Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells. She was formerly a minister in the Turnbull government and she joins us now. Senator, welcome.
Hello, Patricia. How are you?
Good. Why did you cross the floor?
Well, on principle, I thought this was important inquiry to support. I have been critical of the communist regime in China. Indeed, my warnings have been long-standing. And I think that post-Wuhan coronavirus, Australians expect that it won't be business as usual. And therefore, I see an inquiry of this kind to be very timely and most appropriate at this point in time.
So what would you want the inquiry to do? Because the government's obviously constantly watching these things. What do you think it would deal with or expose in that parliamentary context?
Well, I think, Patricia, when you look at the extent of the involvement or the ways in which the communist regime is active in Australia. And it's actually interesting to see a couple of days ago, Alex Joski's paper, ASPI paper in relation, the party Speaks for You paper really does show the extent and at times insidious nature of the communist regime's activities in Australia. I think Australians are concerned, particularly post-Wuhan, and they do not believe that this relationship should be business as usual. And so I do believe that being in a Senate where the committee system has operated so well, and indeed this morning we actually had the President of the Senate telling us and commemorating 50 years of the establishment of the committee system. And yes, of course, at times committee inquiries have been controversial, but I think this is one which would afford the Australian public the opportunity to put forward their point of view in relation to a relationship which has become one which is an overwhelming relationship, one which is a third of our trade, 26.4% of our two-way trade, involves universities, involves Confucius centres, involves a whole spectrum of Australian society. But
on those relationships, Australia is already, it seems, facing trade ramifications from China. We rely on this trade relationship very deeply, as you know, for our economy. Do you think we should be cautious about provoking China at a time where the relationship is just so fragile?
But Patricia, the point is, it is not a good business model to put a third of your trade eggs in one basket. And I mean, this is something that the universities have seen. They obviously haven't followed the edicts of or the teachings of their business schools in terms of diversifying their investments. The point that needs to be made, particularly after what we've seen in the pandemic, is that we have to reduce our reliance on overseas supply chains. We have to reduce our dependency on this one economy, which is a communist regime. It is not, it's a totalitarian regime. It is not a democratic country. And I think that what we've seen through this pandemic is a growing need for us to decouple from China, to reduce our dependency on the communist regime and build up our domestic resilience, particularly in relation to non-reliance of overseas supply chains.
You talk about diversification of our trade. That's something the government's already talking about and talking about quite heavily. India, for instance, recently with a sort of deeper agreement that's been forged there. Do you think the government's already doing what you're saying?
Well, I think that there's scope to do a lot. When you look at this whole relationship, it's not just about universities, it's not just about iron ore, it's not just about all those daily household things that we import every day from China. This relationship is one that traverses a whole range of different things. I am not saying that we ought not to have a relationship. The point that I'm making is that we have got ourselves into a situation where we are now so dependent on this economy in the absence of having other relationships or other stronger relationships. And that's really the point that I'm making. And that's where certainly I know from the extent of the contact that's made with me, particularly about the concerns of what I say the silent majority. There are concerns about foreign investment. There are concerns about the national interest. There are concerns about a whole range of different things. And that's really why it cannot be business as usual. Now, whether we've got the political fortitude to go through with this and do reduce our dependency and do diversify our activities across a whole range of different areas remains to be seen, Patricia.
Just finally, there's something significant that's happened in the Senate. Pauline Hanson was trying to get her motion up, the All Lives Matter motion. The government, and the Greens and Labor, minor parties, everyone kind of ensured that that didn't ever go to a vote. Why did you all work together on that?
Well, I have to say I'm actually on leave at the moment, so I haven't been in the chamber. So I'm not fully across what's happened this afternoon in relation to that. So in relation to this, look, can I just say all lives matter. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, I have to say that the activities that we've seen, particularly of some of the protesters, at a time when we are in these very difficult circumstances, I think has demonstrated a degree of irresponsibility.
That's actually the language of Senator Hanson's motion that all lives matter. The reason the movement's called Black Lives Matter is that black people around the world, in the US, but certainly here as well, are disproportionately represented in these kinds of cases with the police and the justice system. That's why the movement exists, because there is a different treatment.
Patricia, can I just say I respect the right of people to express their point of view and to protest. The point being, at this point in time, given what we are going through, it wasn't the appropriate thing to do. Now, I appreciate events in the United States. Can I also say, though, that in relation to the events in the United States, I think we do need to distinguish what's happening in the United States and what's happening in other parts of the world. I do respect this issue, but at this particular point in time, I would have liked to have seen a lot more responsibility on the part of Australians. And I know that this is an issue that a lot of Australians are very upset about. I mean, there are people who weren't able to go to weddings, weren't able to mourn their family.
That's
Sorry,
about
Patricia.
the actual act of protesting, but I'm talking about the substantive issue, Black Lives Matter. That's because black people are not treated the same in the justice system. Do you agree with that basic contention?
Patricia, I think that as myself being a lawyer, I think that the justice system has served us well in Australia. As I have said, I think that in the end, what is really important is that all Australians have the opportunity to be their best, and that includes most especially having a job. And so therefore, the focus of our government has been on ensuring jobs, jobs, jobs.
Yeah, but just
and that means jobs for all Australians.
The justice system has served this nation well. Do you really think it's served Indigenous Australians well?
I think that the justice system has served Australia well. There are, of course, concerns, and there have been concerns in relation to deaths in custody. But I think in the end, Patricia, when you do look at the reasons why young people go off the rails or things happen, it's because ultimately there has been a breakdown either in their family circumstances or their economic circumstances. And as somebody who worked with Father Chris Riley, Youth Off the Streets, as his chairman over quite a number of years, there are many things that contribute to young people or people going off the rails. So ultimately, stability, and a very important component of that is work. And so therefore, I come back to my original point. It is vitally important for us to have a strong economy. And part of that strong economy is to ensure that as many people are in jobs as is possible.
Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Patricia.
Liberal Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells.